Welcome back, everybody, to Hot Mic on WDY Extra, KSFL, and Inform.com. Pleased to be now joined by 24/7 Sports Gopher Illustrated Ryan Burns, who I believe just got back from Indianapolis yesterday or early this morning.
Late last night. It's always just a handbag and a half going to Big Ten Media Days. Very quick turnaround time, only there for 30 hours or so. But yeah, it's a blast out there in Indy.
So with these media days, are you able to kind of get what kind of information are you able to get from the coaches? I know we were talking off air. PJ Fleck said a lot of words, and you got to try to parse through the tea leaves.
Yeah, I mean, all these coaches are talking for, say, 60 to 75 minutes between their on-air stuff on Big Ten Network. They have side sessions with local media. They have side sessions in front of a podium for 45 minutes where anybody can come up and ask them any questions. I'm listening to people ask random Big Ten head coaches about Tom Brady still. It's a smorgasbord of you never know what you're going to get in Indy. But yeah, for PJ Fleck, he may say a lot more words in his 60 to 75 minutes than, say, a Luke Fickell. So it's trying to parse through all the information to find what's really of some substance there. And there was some pretty good stuff from PJ yesterday.
I apologize, I didn't get a chance to listen to everything PJ said. Did he talk about a starting quarterback? Max Brosmer, I know, is the transfer from Rhode Island or New Hampshire.
Yep.
And Drake Lindsay kind of sitting in there. Is it a battle between those two guys?
No, Max Brosmer is the guy, and Fleck has come out and said that pretty consistently, and he said it again yesterday when talking about Brosmer, that when they were going to take somebody from the portal, it wasn't we're going to take a few guys and have them battle it out. It was a very unique situation where they were going to take a guy. He had to be, quote unquote, the guy, in the words of Fleck, and take control of the team in January, which I think they have been very happy with the way that Brosmer has done that. He came in January, was voted a captain pretty immediately by his teammates within a few months, even before spring ball. You had talked to some of his top pass catchers like Daniel Jackson, an all Big Ten receiver, calls him the general, the commander, whatever you want it to be. Now, we'll see if that leads to more wins on the field for Minnesota this fall than what we saw last year. But he has certainly come in and been everything they wanted him to be in these first 7 months as a Gopher.
So let's say, hypothetically, Brosmer comes out and he struggles early. Do they ride with him the whole season, or do they go to their 3-star quarterback and Drake Lindsay out of Arkansas?
I think there'd have to be some things that go pretty bad for Minnesota to turn to a true freshman in the Big Ten in year 8. I've seen some interesting quarterback play over the years, including last season when Ethan Kaliakmanis had his ups and downs, and now he's going to be tasked to lead the Rutgers Scarlet Knights, who are kind of a preseason darling in the eyes of some of the folks in the Big Ten. I know that there's some larger expectations. Greg Schiano out there at Rutgers talked about how they think they might have a special season under their belt. A lot of that is going to come down to AK. I'm going to be very interested to see if Ethan Kaliakmanis can, number one, be consistent, and can he not turn over the football? Because if he's going to continue to do that in his first time back around with Kirk Ciarrocca, I don't know if Greg Schiano is going to be saying things like that in the mid to late October, but there'd have to be some pretty horrible quarterback play in my mind for Max Brosmer to be benched for a true freshman.
So sticking with, we'll flip over to the defensive side of the ball. New DC and Corey Heatherman, first year as DC. What are the expectations for him this year? I know he said he wants to be more aggressive.
Mm-hmm.
What are your expectations, or PJ Fleck's expectations of him?
They expect to be better defensively. Now, I would say the bar for that is very low, considering they were arguably the worst defense in the Big Ten in terms of allowing explosive plays last year. One of the worst run defenses in the Big Ten. I mean, they allowed almost 30 points a game last year. If you're allowing almost 30 points a game in the Big Ten, it's going to be very difficult to win football games. That's how they lost games that they scored 26, 30, and even 34 points in. I mean, if you were to tell me, I don't have to tell you, if the Bison score 26, 30, or 34 points, you're expecting to be at least 2-1, if not 3-0 in all of those games. And so to be 0-3 in games like that, as much as there's been talk about the offense struggling last year, you lost games like that. I mean, that just can't happen. And that's where now Joe Rossi's at Michigan State calling their defense. You bring in Corey Heatherman, who is Joe Harris-Simiak's number 2 in command from Rutgers, someone that was really good at James Madison, was the AFCA Assistant Coach of the Year just a few years back. to your point, there's been a lot of talk this offseason about them becoming more aggressive. I tell you, the number one word they've used is blitz. Now, it's going to be interesting to see because we haven't seen a Gopher defense blitz a whole lot. And if you're blitzing, you're obviously going to put your secondary in some tougher spots than if you're not. But it's going to be interesting to see. Minnesota has struggled to get consistent pressure at times. So we're going to see how everything gels. But Minnesota does have a lot of starters coming back defensively. But as I said earlier, the bar to clear for Heatherman compared to last season is not incredibly high.
Speaking of starters, I know one key starter they lost was Tyler Nubin, who was drafted this past season. How do they replace him? I know they've went from Antoine Winfield to Tyler Nubin. Who's the next guy? Who's the guy to replace Nubin?
Well, I think long term, we'll see if it comes to fruition this season. It would be the true freshman from Esco and Coy Parrish. There's a lot of expectations for that young man. It goes back to even in December when 5 days before National Signing Day, Ryan Day, the head coach of the Ohio State Buckeyes, is taking a private plane into the Duluth airport, which I can't imagine the last time a blue blood college football coach, 5 days before signing day, took a flight into the Duluth airport to go see Coy Parrots to try and flip him to the Buckeyes. Now, the Gophers hung on. I would say it would be Coy, but he battled some injuries here during the spring when he was still at Esco. Uh, when he's trying to qualify for the state track, he ends up getting hurt, missed, I think, a large portion of June as he was getting acclimated to the Gophers because he was recovering from a soft tissue injury. But I think short term, it's going to be by committee. They're going to give Coy Parrish as much as he can handle. But the question is, you don't want to put too much on his plate early on. So I think it's going to be by committee from guys like Aiden Gooseby, Darius Green, Kerry Brown, Coleman Bryson. That's essentially what PJ Fleck talked about yesterday in Indianapolis. Is they're going to try to do it by committee. It's not just going to be two safeties. You can't replace Tyler Nubin by yourself this fall.
So with the new teams coming into the Big Ten, what's the leeway? Like, is there going to be growing pains with seeing these new teams? Because I know the Gophers do avoid some. They avoid Oregon. They avoid teams like that. What's the leeway with the defense? Like, is it a figuring out pattern, or how do you do how? What's the next step? Like, what's a successful season? I guess, and Gopher football this year.
I think a successful season for them is getting to another bowl game. I mean, they've been to bowl games now for, I think, 5 consecutive years, taking out COVID, where, I mean, bowl games weren't really a thing. So they've been to bowl games pretty consistently, and I think that would be the bar again. You ask Vegas, they've had Minnesota between somewhere around 4.5 to 5.5 wins. It's a little lower than I would expect, but to your point, I think for every Big Ten team, whether it's the West Coast teams coming in, I think everybody's a little bit interested to see that when you have schools like Iowa, Wisconsin, and Minnesota who play a certain style of football, when they take on the UCLAs and the USCs of the world, I understand what you're saying, where you got some higher profile offenses in the Oregons and the USCs of the world where they can outpace you. But if you can get them to play your kind of style of football, are they going to be physical enough, especially in the early years, those West Coast teams, to be able to handle what they're going to see? So I think that's about one of the most exciting parts I want to see is, especially for a team like Minnesota, they get UCLA and USC in consecutive weeks. USC comes to Huntington Bank Stadium, then Minnesota travels to the Rose Bowl. It's either going to be a track meet or you're going to get stuck in the mud. And I think that's going to be the case for a lot of these games. And so it's going to be very interesting to see. But I think expectations for Minnesota, what's a successful season? Getting to a bowl game to me is the bottom part of that. And if Brosmer is good, I think the sky is kind of the limit in terms of you can win 7, 8 games. But that's the case for any of these Big Ten schools. Which of these transfer quarterbacks are any good? Is Tyler Van Dyke from Wisconsin good? Is Cade McNamara finally healthy? You can go on and on down the list. Everybody's got a brand new transfer quarterback working with a brand new offensive coordinator. Which ones are good? Which ones are not? It's going to be tough to say here going into August which one is that, which one of that is true.
So I know they opened the season with North Carolina. They lost to them last season. I believe it was the second or third week of the season.
Yep.
I know in North Carolina last year had Drake May. What are like the expectations going into game 1?
I think the expectation for Minnesota is to certainly be competitive. I think you look at Vegas right now, they're a slight favorite, which shouldn't shock anyone to your point that when you lose the number 3 overall pick in the draft And the quarterback situation for the Tar Heels is very much up in the air yet. You can't just replace Drake May. You're not in Ohio State or an Oregon or a USC where you can go out and buy the next guy. For Mac Brown in North Carolina, I think it's going to be more by committee early on there. Now, the matchup to watch for me is North Carolina has one of the best running backs in the country in Omarion Hampton. As I said earlier, Minnesota had one of the worst run defenses in America last year. So if you're just going to hemorrhage 5-6 yards a carry on the ground, it's going to be very difficult to win that game. Now, if you force North Carolina with one of their new transfer quarterbacks to try and beat you, like you saw in the opener last year for Minnesota against Jeff Sims in Nebraska, you can force turnovers, and that's how you're going to win the game. But if Minnesota can't stop the run, it's going to be a long afternoon. That being said, on the flip side, North Carolina's defense wasn't much to write home about. As someone who was in Chapel Hill last year, Minnesota had guys running all over the field wide open, and the quarterback couldn't hit them. You get Darius Taylor back, who I think is one of the best running backs in the Big Ten when healthy. So it's either going to be a track meet or I think it's going to get stuck in the mud there early on August 29th.
Just two quick questions before we let you go. Speaking of the D-line, local guy from up here, Carter Menz, is he a redshirt freshman? Is he expected to see any playing time this season?
He's expected to compete behind Minnesota's rush end, Danny Strigow. Now, Danny Strigow is going into his last year of eligibility. So it's going to be Carter Menz competing for that number 2 spot, which is still a lot of reps. I mean, we're talking about 300 or so reps, but he's going to be competing with LSU transfer Jackson Howard for that. I've heard a lot of positive things behind the scenes about how they think Carter's first 12 months have gone as a Gopher. It's about adding weight. I think they're very excited about his twitch, his length, but I think he's got to add another 10, 15 pounds before he's really ready to handle a full onslaught of Big Ten reps. But there's a lot of positive things I've heard behind the scenes about Carter. I just think he might be another year away from really, really contributing.
And last one, Riley Sunram, 6'5". They got him listed on the depth chart as 6'5", 300 pounds. Has he acclimated well down there? Can maybe you see that 4-game rule come into play this season?
I could certainly see it. I mean, the pride of Kindred was someone that I'll never forget his camp performance. He came down for a July Gopher camp before his junior season and put on one of the most impressive displays. I've been going to Gopher camps now for 14 years. And for what he did as a sophomore going into his junior year, it was one of the most impressive things I've seen. I don't have to tell you about all of his accomplishments, whether it's in track, basketball, or certainly for football. He's big and strong. And certainly if Minnesota has some issues at defensive tackle or there's some injuries that come up, I think he's strong enough to play, potentially as a true freshman. But to me, I think in an ideal world, certainly you get to redshirt him. But I certainly do believe Riley Sunram is going to find his way into playing 4 games this fall for Minnesota.
The Gophers do know that he can catch, right? He had a nice catch in the state championship game.
Yeah, I saw that. Trust me, he reminds defensive line coach Winston Delighted constantly that he's got some hands. Maybe they can use him on the offensive side of the ball.
Well, Ryan, I appreciate you taking the time to join us on this Friday. Have a good weekend, and we'll chat again down the road.
All right, appreciate you.
Ryan Burns, Gopher Illustrated, 24/7 Sports. When we come back, we'll take our final break. When we come back, we'll do a little what to watch, and we'll say goodbye. You're watching Hot Mic on WDY Extra, KSFL, and Inform.com.